Hey guys, what's up? It's Lekti. Today we're gonna rank all MOP Classic DPS specs throughout the different tiers. A small disclaimer, I am basing my opinions on the experience I've had playing MOP on different private servers throughout the last couple of years, where I've organized and raid-led hundreds of raids. To be able to rank all these specs, you will have to account for a lot of things. First of all, are we mainly talking about single or multi-target encounters in a tier? What raid size, raid difficulty, and raid composition are we running? And lastly, but maybe also most importantly, our kill time on the different encounters. I will try to use my experience to paint a picture for you guys that is as generalized as possible, and I hope you enjoy. All right, let's start out our tier list. First up, the Frost Decay. Frost Decay probably belongs somewhere in between good and decent. It deals decent damage towards the end of tier 14. But on most encounters, it's a bit behind other DPS specs. So it's probably fair to put it down here. Unholy Decay basically feels like it's been created for Mists of Pandaria on a vast amount of encounters. You can keep up your strong dots. You can negate a bunch of boss mechanics with your anti-magic shell. And you even have a second life should anything go south for you. On many fights you will find Unholy Decay on top of the DPS meter. And that's probably your first legend here. For Feral Druids, they deal good damage at the end of tier 14. I've seen some Ferals on top of the meters. For progression rate, there's probably no real reason to bring a Feral. Like, it brings you no utility. You would maybe bring it for Gear Soak. But I would probably rather bring another Rogue or Warrior or something else instead of a Feral. But yeah, because of the high damage it can deal towards the end of tier 14, it probably, I mean, it's definitely better than a Frost Decay, so it probably goes up here. Boomy. Bad news for all Boomy players. I'm really sorry, but there's not much to talk about here. Boomy is basically considered a meme spec in tier 14. And you should probably not give this spec too many thoughts. I would not recommend playing it in tier 14. Beastmaster also doesn't really work out yet in tier 14. And the other Hunter specs are just way better. So I'll probably put it down here as well. Survival Hunter feels really good to play in MOP. It has really high damage output, really high movement, and its kit is perfectly to deal with a lot of boss mechanics in tier 14. You would basically always want to bring a survival hunter in your 10-man, and you probably even would bring a handful of survival hunters in your 25-man. It's an insanely strong, fun to play, fairly straightforward spec, and also deserves a spot up here. For Marksman Hunter, it can deal good damage. Not quite as much as a Survival Hunter, but it can definitely hold its own against most other specs. It's lacking in mobility compared to the Survival Hunter. The same as every other Hunter spec, it can bring every raid buff in the game. But if you compare it to the godly Survival Hunter, it's just not a preferred choice. It would probably go down here for me. Fire Mage, as for most expansions early on, there's just not enough crit to make the Fire Mage work yet. So I would not recommend playing it in tier 14, especially because next up the Frost Mage is just so good in tier 14. It can deal insane single target and cleave damage. It has extremely high mobility, good defensives, even immunities. The only real thing a Frost Mage is lacking is raid utility. But even considering that, I would probably still put it up here. You would not want to bring too many because of the missing raid utility, but bringing like 1 to 3 Frost Mages is completely fine, and they can deal with a lot of mechanics as well because of their mobility, immunity, cleave damage. Arcane Mage. Arcane Mage mostly works around the rune, and in a lot of fights in tier 14 it feels really bad to play rune. It also doesn't catch up to Frost Mage yet, so I would probably put it down here. You, same as many of the other specs, you can play it, but there's just a way better option in Frost Mage. So yeah, probably goes down here. The Windwalker Monk. Fairly similar to the Feral Druid. It can deal good DPS, especially AoE, but doesn't provide your raid with anything. So there are encounters where it's preferable to have a Windwalker, like Emperor or Sharfear. It feels really good to have high AoE DPS there. But even there, you would probably rather bring a decent AoE DPS that also provides raid utility. Yeah, going next to the Feral here. Red Pelly. Not good DPS early on. Works off of haste. So as in every expansion early on, there's just not a lot of secondary stats. Because you have to hit expertise and hit caps. So the thing Red has going for it are the utility it brings to raids, like the Devo and the double sack and the double hop is very valuable, especially considering that you play around high vengeance on most fights. Having a double sack there is just worth a lot. And even though it doesn't deal very good damage, it probably still goes up here just based on the utility it brings. The Shadow Priest also works off of haste, and early on there's just not a lot of secondary stat available. Later on it deals good DPS. It gets a decent force set in tier 14, and there are some fights where Shadow really can shine in like a longer multi-target fights. It brings Vampiric Embrace and is overall, it's definitely higher than the bottom 3, but not quite up there, I would say. Probably right here. Next up, rogues. This has to be assassination. Assassination rogues deal good DPS. You don't see a lot of them around, mainly because there's a superior spec to Asa, but it can definitely hold its own against many other DPS. Probably going up here. Next up, the sub rogue. That's the most popular, arguably the best rogue spec, especially early on. Works really well in many encounters. Rogues bring a lot to the table. They obviously bring tricks, smoke bomb. They also help out with a bunch of raid mechanics through their cloak and their feint. So yeah, you always want to bring a rogue or a couple of rogues to your raid. It's not quite up there, I feel like, but it's definitely meta spec. Also works really well with a mastery people set that increases your slice and dice. Next up, combat rogue. Basically the cleave spec of the rogues. There are fights where you can use a combat rogue, but most of the times, even on these AoE fights, you rather bring the sub rogue and have him just deal single target damage to the boss instead of swapping to ads. Yeah, it also, like, the playstyle doesn't flow as much yet on a combat rogue. This will change later on, but in tier 14, there's not the real place for a combat rogue. I'm considering putting him down here. Yeah, we'll probably do that. Next up, the Elemental Shaman, the freaking best spec in the game. I've been maining Elemental Shaman for a number of years now. I think it feels really good in tier 13. You have decent damage, decent single target, good AoE DPS. You bring Stormlash, that's extremely valuable. In AoE scenarios, you can heal up your raid in no time with guidance. You have really good utility in root, stun, knockback, interrupt. Yeah, elemental shamans are very welcomed in most raids. You basically always bring one in 10 man. You can bring one or two in a 25-man setting. Definitely a meta spec for tier 14. For the enhancer, it also deals really good damage. Later on, has insanely high burst DPS, which makes it really good with faster kill times, and has similar utility to the elemental. Also brings Stormlash, a bunch of raid healing cooldowns, but is a melee, and you never want to bring too many melees. So it probably goes a tiny amount below the Elemental Shaman and then goes down here. Affliction Lock in tier 14. There are some fights where it's really good. Stoneguard, Emperor. Some people play it on other multi-target fights, but that's mostly padding over actual boss DPS. So not a lot of fights where you play Affli Lock, and on most other fights, it cannot keep up with the other Warlock specs. So for now, for tier 14, it probably goes down here. Demolock can deal really good damage. Unfortunately, Demolock is really underrepresented on the private servers I played. But I think with all the Demolocks coming in from Qatar, they might teach us a thing or two, and I think it can really have a decent output. It's probably not a meta spec, but I think it definitely can be a good DPS spec. As for Destruction Lock, That's basically what you run in 90% of your fights in Tier 14. Has a really good kit that works with Tier 14 bosses, deals really good damage, and as always in WoW, you always want to bring a lock or two for gates, for hellstones, for damage. Yeah, definitely a meta spec as well. The Fury Warrior, its time hasn't quite come yet. The rotation feels extremely clunky when you don't have enough crit yet. And it's considered mostly a meme spec in Tier 14. The only thing it has going for it is raid utility. And even though the Warrior arguably has the best raid utility, it still doesn't get the Fury Warrior anywhere close to these other DPS specs further up. In contrast to Fury Warrior, the Arms Warrior is insanely good in Tier 14 and works really, really well in many of the boss fights. Extremely high cleave AoE damage, decent single target damage, and yeah, paired with the raid utility it brings, it's an absolute legend in Tier 14. You can't have enough Arms Warriors in your raid, basically. So yeah, there we go for Tier 14. I think this is a fair list. Next up, let's talk about Tier 15. With Tier 15, the Throne of Thunder got introduced, and we progressed in the legendary quest to acquire the two really powerful DPS meta gems, and we got introduced to our PPM and just overall really powerful trinkets that shook up the meta by a good bit. Let's take a look together. In the Throne of Thunder, you could acquire 3 new caster trinkets in Vushulace, Breath of the Hydra, and Chayes, 3 new agility trinkets in Rinataki, Bajuju, and the so-called Roro, and 3 new strength trinkets in Primordius Talisman, the Feather, and Gaze of the Twins. The 2 trinkets that stand out here are definitely Vushulace and Roro, as Roro enabled Feral and Vushulace enabled Airfleet to be the DPS kings in this tier. Okay, where does this leave us with our tier list? I think we are just gonna go class by class and see where the different specs end up in tier 15. Starting out with the DK, the Unholy DK stays a really good DPS. It is not gonna top the meters all the time in tier 15, so it probably moves one down into meta. The Frost DK performs a bit better than in tier 14. It's probably fair to move him up 1 rank here. Moving on to Druids, the Feral, when playing around Roro, is becoming an absolute DPS monster and will in many cases top the meters. And even though it still doesn't bring any raid utility, the sheer amount of damage it can dish out will get him a spot at the top. As for Moonkin, with the new meta gem and some more stats on the gear, it's probably no longer a wheelchair spec, but also not really up there with the others yet. Probably moves up 1 rank here. Moving on to Hunters, the survival will definitely keep its spot at the top, still doing insane damage. The kit is also working insanely well for tier 15 again, and it's just overall a really, really well designed class for tier 15. The marksman might move up a bit. I've seen some marksmen contest survival in damage. It obviously still lacks some mobility, but it's definitely fair to move it up a rank. I feel like the Beastmaster, unfortunately, can't even come close to the other 2 specs yet, so unfortunately it has to stay down here. Mages. The Arcane Mage definitely picks up pace in Tier 15, and the available gear, the meta gem, and being able to play around your rune much better than in Tier 14 brings this guy up all the way to the top. It can even contest Frost Mage in many fights, and is just a really, really solid DPS to bring. The Frost Mage probably still deserves its spot up here. It shares the top DPS with Arcane Mage on many fights. They go back and forth on the different encounters, and I still think it's an extremely well designed class for Tier 15 as well. The Fire Mage also starts to deal damage, at least at the end of Tier 15. It's not quite where it wants to be, but it's definitely not considered bad anymore. There are some fights where it can deal really good damage. I wouldn't go as far as putting it in good yet, but it's definitely decent. The Windwalker Monk can probably stay here. It still deals good DPS, really good AoE DPS, but doesn't provide the raid with anything. So I think it's fair to keep him here. Same probably goes for the red. The red won't be bottom, won't be top DPS, and still provides you with really good utility. The Shadow will really pick up pace halfway through Tier 15. He is benefiting a lot from the new meta gem, and the more haste you can stack in Tier 15, so that guy probably moves up here. Rogues. The Assassination Rogue probably has to move one down here. It won't be anywhere close to a sub-rogue in Tier 15. Yeah, the sub-rogue is dealing insane damage in Tier 15. The tier set is extremely good, as well as the trinkets just work really well with the rogue kit, and he will be top DPS in many fights. Definitely deserves a spot here at the top. And as for Combat Rogue, I would probably keep him down here. Like, the only fight you even would consider playing combat is Council, and he might out DPS the other two speccs there, but won't be anywhere close on any other fight. So I think he can stay down here. Elemental and Enhancement Shamans. Elemental Shamans definitely can keep their meta spot. The 2-set is really good, helps them a lot in AoE DPS, and the kit is just still something you always want to bring in a 10-man, and also in a 25-man. I think for the Enhancer the same applies as in Tier 14. It's basically a really bursty melee that brings good raid utility. You can do without Enhancer, so I wouldn't put him up in meta. But he's definitely solid and a good DPS. The Warlocks. The Affliction Lock, as mentioned, becomes an absolute menace in Tier 15. When he can keep up his dots that are buffed by Wushulays and Rogue Tricks, he will deal insane amounts of single and multi-target damage. And if there would be a category above Legend, I would probably put him there. But the damage of the Affliction Lock becomes absolutely freaking nuts in Tier 15. The Demo Lock probably stays here and good. Can be a really solid DPS on many fights, but is nowhere close to an Affliction Lock. The Destruction. Warlock probably moves one down, as there's almost no fight where you would pick Destruction over Affliction as soon as you got your gear in tier 15. Last but not least, the Warriors. The Arms Warrior probably has to move one spot down. It still brings insane raid utility and has really good AoE damage, but really can't keep up on single target anymore. You would still always bring him for his utility, and as mentioned, he's great in AoE fights. But he's no legend anymore. Fury Warriors, you don't really want to touch them during progression of tier 15, but with like the end gear of tier 15, Fury becomes a great single target spec and probably moves all the way up to good here. Really good DPS at the end of tier 15. With tier 16, we got introduced to the Siege of Orgrimmar, and alongside it, to insanely game-breaking trinkets. Just take a look at these. Don't get fooled by the wrong tooltips here. On Heroic Warforged, these trinkets would either boost your secondary stats by up to 9%, or reduce the cooldown of 6 of your major abilities by over 50%. Complete madness. Let's go back to our tier list. We can start out with the DKs again. Unholy stays decent, not at the top, not at the bottom. And Frost even outperforms Unholy on some of the fights. So it's either Unholy one down or Frost one up. I would probably move Frost one up. Next up, the Druids. Pharaohs stay really good DPS. They also play Roro throughout tier 16. Deal really good single target damage, but are not as far ahead of the pack as in tier 15. So he probably moves one spot down here. Drew Boomkins. There are some really good Boomkin fights in Siege of Orgrimmar. So the Boomies really start to deal some serious DPS here. Probably not quite meta yet, but at least a good DPS in Siege. Hunters, the survival, there's not much to say. It keeps its spot at the top. It's an insanely good DPS. The marksman can actually challenge the DPS of the survival in many of the fights in Siege. But there are some fights like Siege Crafter, for example, where you really want to play either survival or BM. So marksman, probably move him up to meta, considering that he has either one of the specs for some of the fights. The BM starts to get viable in tier 16 if you have the right gear, and can be really good on some fights. For example, as mentioned on Siegecrafter, it can do a really good job dealing with the weapons, and does overall some good DPS. This guy definitely moves up the ranks. As for the mages, all specs are viable in tier 16, with the Arcane Mage having a slight edge in most of the fights. That probably moves Frost Mage down one rank, and the Fire Mage definitely moves up. It starts to deal some real damage here in tier 16. As for the Windwalker Monk, I gotta be honest, like on the last couple of servers I played, by the release of Siege of Orgrimmar, there weren't many Windwalker players left. The Windwalkers I played with dealt good DPS, really good AoE DPS, but good AoE DPS is not as required anymore because everything deals insane AoE DPS, especially with the new legendary cloak. So they are not in high demand. Probably moving down a rank here. The red Pally is still really good middle of the pack DPS with really good raid utility. He can stay here. The Shadow, with benefiting from secondary stats and the new trinkets, deals really good damage. There are a lot of fights that are really beneficial to Shadows, and they deserve to move a rank up. Elemental Shamans stay a meta spec, solid DPS, middle of the pack, really good AoE, feels really good with the new trinkets, still gives a really good raid utility, can stay here in meta, and Enhancer can probably move one up, also deals really good damage. The trinkets work well with his kit, and yeah, also providing the same raid utility just makes him a really solid pick. As for Warlocks, the Affliction Lock stays the god of MOP. There are so many good fights, AoE fights as well as single target. This guy is just unbeatable and deserves the top spot for sure. Demolock, very solid on many fights. I would probably keep him in good, just in comparison to the Affliction Lock. And there are some fights, like for example, Immersois, where Destruction actually outperforms Affliction. So I guess this guy deserves a spot up here. Last but not least, Warriors. Arms Warrior, really strong in tier 16. Many good fights. The trinkets also work really well. And the same goes for Fury. Getting to your crit cap and playing with the new trinkets just makes his rotation feel so much better, and allows you to contest top DPS as Fury. Paired with the insane raid utility Warriors bring, these two are just really solid meta picks. This was it for my MOP Classic DPS tier list. As you can see, even though some of the specs struggle early on, throughout the expansion, most of the specs are really solid DPS choices. I hope this list can help you in choosing your DPS spec for the upcoming MOP Classic, and I would love your feedback in the comments. If you want to see more upcoming MOP content, feel free to subscribe or tune into my Twitch channel. See you guys.